Stay cool and choose from over 40 in-stock ceiling fans for under $100, plus an 11% rebate at Menards. We carry the largest selection of in-stock Hunter ceiling fans, available in a variety of designs, finishes, and features. Create the perfect look and lighting for any room with a new Hunter ceiling fan. Visit Menards.com and view our entire selection of Hunter ceiling fans, plus the weekly flyer and other great deals going on now.
Save big money at Menards.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Welcome to Heritage Voices, episode 28. I'm Jessica Yaquinto, and I'll be your host today. And today we're talking about the archaeological spectrum. Before we begin, I'd like to honor and acknowledge that the lands I'm recording on today are part of the Diné and the ancestral Puebloan homeland, as well as the Nooch or Ute Treaty Lands. So I'm really excited to have Rebecca Heidenreich on the show today. She and I actually met while she was on a CRM excavation project, actually, not too long ago on the Navajo Nation. And I'm excited to have her on the show because she's really done work in all kinds of settings, and from the academic setting to CRM to tribal settings to other land management settings. So she really covers the spectrum, and we talk a decent amount about CRM because some of you have requested more CRM archaeologists, and we are working on it. So this will start getting that conversation going for those of you that have been itching for that. So thank you, Rebecca, for coming on the show.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Shall we start with the traditional question that we usually start with, which is, how did you get into this work?
Okay. Well, I grew up on the Navajo Reservation in Tohatchee, New Mexico, and, I wasn't really aware of the fact that I was Navajo, I was indigenous because, I was just living my life. It was actually my sister who started picking up books on Egyptology, and, I was pretty interested in it just because of the religious aspect of it. And from there, I just kind of always wanted to be an archaeologist, ever since I was a middle school student. And high school, I knew that I wanted to do archaeology, and the more I looked into it, I became more aware of like indigenous rights and kind of like the dynamic here on the reservation versus like elsewhere, because we would travel with my family outside of the reservation, and I could definitely tell that there was a difference in just interaction, social interaction. And so, I really wanted to study that more because, I grew up from within a traditional family. So I knew that culture was important. I knew my identity was important. And so I knew archaeology was taboo in the sense of, ancestral Puebloans and Asazi. And I don't know, I just kind of was always drawn to it, and I wanted to always kind of change that notion of it being taboo. And I just kind of, fully engaged myself into it and, got to this point in my life.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting that you approached it almost from two exact opposite places. Like, first, just this intellectual curiosity about Egypt, but then later coming back and realizing how directly applicable it was to your life and how you thought, things could be better in the world, basically.
Definitely.
As far as like the social justice aspect and things like that. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, because, I can remember being a little girl and going outside the reservation, and I could definitely feel, in your social interactions, you can normally feel vibrations and vibes off other people. And, when I went off the reservation, I definitely could feel that, especially, with the interactions between my mother and, other people. It really kind of stressed me out as a child. And I knew that there was something there, and I didn't really have that full on education of, the Navajo political system and cultural ways and stuff like that. Because, I was only a little child. And so I definitely could feel, tension and kind of like this, like, I don't know what it is. Like, I wish I had a better word for it. It definitely just made me feel awkward and weird. Versus, when I'm at home, everyone speaks the same language. Everyone more or less looks the same. There's that same like respect that people have for one another, for the elders, and especially for the land, and just life in general. And, with that, I really wanted to see how that was in the archaeological setting, because people in the field of archaeology, they're essentially studying us, studying our ancestors and the land and social dynamics within, indigenous lands. And, it always kind of puzzled me how, why aren't Native people the ones doing this, and that always like really bothered me. So I kind of just like fully forced myself to go into archaeology, and of course I wanted to, like I had that heart for it. And, I come from strong people, a long line of strong people, and it just like really made me want to like represent my voice and my people and kind of like who we are, in publications and how we are in real life.
And how do you feel like that was received back home? I mean, you mentioned the taboos and things like that. Did people come around?
Well, it's funny because it's taboo, yes, in the sense of, when people think of archaeology, they think of burials. And I mean, that is one aspect of it. But, I had a lot of people say, well, why are you doing that? You shouldn't be messing around with that stuff. You should just leave it alone and leave it as it is. And, like I heard that, I understood where they were coming from, just because, my family's traditional, and I fully understood, their concerns. But, being an educated person who's also indigenous, I saw the difference, and it's just like, why is it that we can't study ourselves? Why do we have to be the study subjects? And that really bothered me, because in my mind and my spirit, I know how intelligent I am. And even people on the reservation who haven't had education, proper education, students who were in the Indian boarding schools, they're intelligent. They're very intelligent. A lot of our elders, they're very intelligent in what they speak and the way they communicate and just how they are as individuals. And that frustrated me, because I knew this, but yet it was the whole, outsider looking in. They're the ones studying us. And, like I didn't want that anymore. I wanted to be the one to write a paper and say, well, these are my thoughts with the ethnographic, ideas, but also, archaeology, and kind of collaborate that, because that's a major thing that archaeology is trying to move away from, representing more of the cultural aspect of humans.
Yeah, absolutely. So on that note, would you rather write about your own people, or would you rather write about other people?
I wanted to do that. I wanted to write about, the archaeology here. But more or less, it's not so much about the writing and, the doing archaeology. It's about the idea of culture, humans, the scientific methods and stuff like that, because this is one thing that always like got to me, the fact that anthropology is the main study and archaeology is only a subfield of anthropology. And yet there are, a lot of scientists, archaeological scientists, who don't really incorporate, they don't incorporate ethnography.
I mean, again, I'm an ethnographer by training. I work in CRM with mostly archaeologists, but I definitely obviously know what you mean, that the human side really gets ignored sometimes.
Oh yeah, it does.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had first of all, I just get, even people that know me pretty well will sometimes introduce me as an archaeologist, just because there's not this understanding that there are other like professions within CRM or other ways to approach heritage.
Right.
And then, or I remember not too long ago, I had somebody tell me that until they met me, they didn't realize that ethnographer was like a thing that still existed. Like basically, they thought of ethnographers as just like the ethnographers from 100 years ago that people in archaeology always use for, quote unquote, ethnographic analogy, which is always kind of bizarre for me because, like, first of all, there are still ethnographers out there, but mostly we're not just like sitting there watching people and looking how they like exactly make pots or things like that. You know what I mean?
Like Frank Boas or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I'm not just sitting there. So people will come to me and ask me more like, oh, do you have any ethnographic resources on, like pot making? And it's like, that's not really what we do. Like CRM ethnography today is really about more documenting and telling people's story of their connection to place or certain places or things like that. It's like Boaz or just trying to get down every minute detail of how something was done because we feel like indigenous people are about to die off. That's not, I hope that's not ethnography today. I hope there's not ethnographers out there still doing that. It's funny. All right. So you talked a little bit about the spark and the specific challenges you've had with anthropology and archaeology. How did you go from this first interest in archaeology to becoming a professional in the field? What were your next steps?
Let me just say that I had an amazing mentor, Dr. Judson Finley from Utah State University. He really helped me a lot because when I first met him and we engaged in a conversation, I told him, hey, this I want to do. I want to do this. I want to do this and to do that. And he's like, okay, let's do it. And we did. When I was a freshman, that summer I was a freshman in college, I, went into my field school. So that really triggered kind of my path in archaeology. Like I said, I fully immersed myself.
But as a freshman, that's impressive. I feel like most people don't do field school until later.
Exactly.
Like you knew what you wanted.
Yeah. And it's kind of odd because I'm surprised not a lot of other students, I'm surprised that students don't do that more often, because how are you going to fully understand what you're learning in the classroom if you don't really know what's going on in the field? Yes,
absolutely.
Yeah. And that's kind of like a major thing. Like, how do you even know if you like it if you're not, working in the field? Because the dynamic's completely different. Like the stuff that you learn in the classroom, it's not always going to be the same in the field.
100%.
Yeah, but I met him and he helped me and it just went from there. And yeah, it's really been an amazing experience. It really has. I'm just so happy, and him and I are just like, we're really close. He's a great guy. He worked a lot on the Crow Reservation. The cool thing about the Crow Reservation is they actually hire tribal members to do archaeology for the reservation itself, for the tribe itself.
Mm-hmm.
And he really helps with that. And his father, Chris Finley, too, they help with the field school. And so I knew he was the person to go to because he totally understood, archaeology and the indigenous perspective. So I knew he was definitely the person that I wanted to work with. And yeah, he's just a great guy.
Mm-hmm. So wait, is that where your field school was? I noticed that you went to the Crow Field School, but was that a separate field school from your original one?
Yeah, that was separate. I volunteered there the summer of 2016. It was pretty great, just helping wherever they needed me. But my field school was actually near the Snake River in Idaho. And we actually excavated a bison jump site, and that was pretty awesome.
Yeah. How are the two field schools different?
Different location. Because the Crow Reservation's more on the plains area. The southern end of Idaho, where the Snake River goes through. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's a great basin, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what about the fact that the one was done through the Crow Tribal Historic Preservation Office, right? And then the other one was done through a university. Did you notice any differences in the approach because of that?
Oh, definitely. I had a good time at my field school in Idaho, but, the Crow tribe, they really wanted to incorporate the traditional aspect of archaeology into what the students were learning. And that's one thing that I was really, really happy to be a part of, just because I knew that something like that would really take off if the Navajo Nation ever decided to do that.
Mm-hmm.
It goes back to this idea of, indigenous people doing the archaeology themselves, And so I really thought that was just amazing because, they had their own talks and discussions on, okay, you come up on an archaeological site. You look at it, okay, what's represented there, both tribally and archaeologically. And, it was just a great balance of that. Every single site we went to.
All right. Well, we are already at our first break.
Cool.
All right. Well, we will be back in a moment.
America's favorite place to watch football is Stadium Swim. Located at the Circa Resort and Casino in Las Vegas. Catch all the biggest games at a viewing experience built for sports fans. Chill in one of our 6 pools on 3 different levels for a perfect view of our massive screen. Plenty of seating options from cozy day beds to private, temperature-controlled cabanas. Stadium Swim. Book your spot today at circalasvegas.com.
Save on O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner. Get 2 cans of O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner for just $8. Valid in-store only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
All right. Are back. So, as I mentioned in your intro, you have quite the range of experience. So let's move next to your research experiences, which you have quite a lot on quite wide-ranging subjects.
Okay.
Mapping and, geoarchaeology. It's impressive. Just the width and breadth. No, that's wrong. Width and breadth. Yeah, so can you talk some about all of those experiences?
Let's see. One of my favorite experiences was near the Dinosaur National Park. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I've spent a decent amount of time there.
Cool. All right. Yeah.
Let me just do a quick PSA and say, if you're ever in the area, Dinosaur is amazing. Like the archaeology is just super impressive, especially for what you would expect for a national park that's obviously known for its dinosaurs. But the archaeology is really impressive.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. There's a lot of Fremont archaeology in that area, specifically in Jones Hole.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that was pretty awesome. We were doing some monitoring for the national park in that area, and oh my goodness, it was so beautiful, so beautiful. You have the Fremont pictographs that have, the really broad shoulders and kind of like the V-shaped body. And it's incredible how far up they place these. It's crazy.
And like how big some of them are and how far away you can see some of them from. It's just impressive.
Yeah, like it was pretty dangerous because, we had to go up to each, panel and rock face just to, record them and kind of see like, the erosion process of them. And it was pretty, I'd say it's some areas are pretty dangerous, but the love of archaeology, right? So yeah, that was probably one of my favorites. Beautiful area, location, and it's pretty awesome because one of the major reasons the Fremont lived in that area was for the farming. Because they had the creeks right there to water their corn. So yeah, it's a really beautiful area.
Right, and that aspect seems to get ignored a lot, the Fremont farming, if I understand correctly, right?
Yeah, and there's a lot of like alcoves that had rock art in them, but also some of them we'd run into like wattle and daub, so they were actually storing their corn in some of these alcoves, and that was pretty awesome because in the daub you can actually see the fingerprints.
Yeah. Nothing that quite like evokes a feeling of humanity as looking at somebody's fingerprints from 1,000 years ago.
Exactly. That's so wild. Like, you're just like, oh, cool, mesmerized by all these beautiful works of art. And yet, you see something like that. And it definitely humbles you in terms of like how they were living and, their means of survival.
Yeah. How did you've had all these different research experiences in more of an academic setting? How does that differ from, say, a CRM setting?
Dramatically. I love scholarly archaeology just because, you can take your time with it. You can really analyze whatever material you're working with, the sediment, your photographs, your maps, even just exploring the area, and, you're able to do everything that you need to in the field, like take photographs, make maps, take samples, and even in the lab, you're able to work in the lab and see the artifacts, watch the artifacts, and, catalog them. It's really quick paced because, they need to get this done. They need to get the data recovery done, for a pipeline or, building or whatever. So it's definitely a faster pace and it's crunch time. And, not everybody gets to map or take photographs, it's all trying to save time and get the work done in time for the main project. So it definitely differs in the sense of data recovery and all that good stuff.
Yeah, what are the different aspects of CRM that you have done? Like, I mean, you've worked in the lab, you've done survey, you've done excavation, you've done monitoring. Can you explain for you what each of those types of experiences has been like, for somebody that maybe is interested in CRM but doesn't know the kind of like, what does working in a lab mean? What does doing a survey mean? What does doing an excavation mean? Just like a real quick overview of that kind of work that you've done in CRM.
With CRM, depending on, the project, it varies, but usually before excavation, way before data collection, you start the process of, okay, mapping the area, what areas need to be surveyed. So you usually go through survey first and, have people within their own transects and kind of looking on the surface for archaeological, artifacts or features and recording those on the surface. And after, it's usually testing. So usually, digging trenches to kind of see like the profile of the sediment of like certain areas where archaeological sites are found or were previously recorded, just to kind of get a greater grasp on what's below the surface. And usually based off those testing trenches, that's usually where we find bigger features like pit houses or, hearths or, whatever you may have there. And from there, we go off of that and we go into data recovery. So data recovery, it depends on what kind of feature you're working with or, what you're actually seeing, because it's very subjective, especially when you don't know what's under, the surface. So after that's all done, you go into mapping and then GIS, but also all the data, all the artifacts and samples they get collected and, they go into the lab and they get processed and tested and analyzed and cataloged. So that's pretty much the whole gist of it. In the lab, you're washing artifacts, you're trying to see it in greater detail, without all the sediment on them. And, just, it's really about organization and, maintaining your methodology when you're in the field.
What about monitoring?
Oh, yeah, monitoring.
A lot.
So monitoring usually takes place, once data recovery is done with, and we give the okay to put in a pipeline or whatever else. So whenever they're digging an area where archaeological sites were found, they always need a monitor there, and the monitor is there to just like see if there's anything we missed, or if they go into greater depths in the ground. We're just there to kind of stop them, to prevent, further destruction of whatever else is there. So it's really just kind of like protecting what we may have not, come to see or analyze. So that's basically the gist of monitoring, just to prevent that. But also, if we do come across something, we have to be the ones there to, halt the movements around that area, just to prevent the, destruction of the feature, and, be the ones to record and kind of like follow the chain of command going up to, the state.
Yeah. And okay, that's one thing I'm personally curious about, since I've never been an archaeology monitor, is what is the threshold, I guess, for what actually makes something stop? I mean, obviously human remains or anything associated would be like no question stopping.
Right.
But like it's the Southwest. I can't imagine somebody putting in a backhoe just about anywhere and not pulling up pottery and lithics. And so at what point, maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. I'm not an archaeologist. So at what point do you say, okay, no, this is like, you have to stop?
So we usually go based off of the National Register. So anything that, is, pretty extensive. Like if you come across like a ceramic or, a fragment of a ceramic or whatever, that's usually okay. I mean, like you want to stop and analyze and check just to make sure. But if it's just that, then it's it's okay. Like a dark staining, from charcoal to see if there's like a hearth. So any anything that would look like a feature. So something big,
Okay.
that is classified as a feature. That's usually when the halting happens.
Okay. Yeah. So, okay, between those different types of CRM work that you mentioned, which one was your favorite?
That's a hard one. It's a hard one because before I came back home in 2016 is when I came back home. So before then, I was usually in the Great Basin area or the plains. And so coming back home and actually doing archaeology in my backyard was pretty great. It was pretty great.
Yeah.
So it's hard to, just say, oh, this one was better, because it's all amazing archaeology. Because, to be human is to have that variation.
Right.
Just like, how we are today. This person likes that. This person likes that. This person built their house this way. This person built, whatever else this way. There's that human variation. So to see it in that setting, it just, I don't know, it just kind of gave me chills, because, that's the human aspect of it, of archaeology, is that variation there of how they decided to build their homes, what they decided to place in their homes, or, structure inside their homes. If there was a bench, or, their fireplace was this area and this area, So it's really hard to say that, just because they're all very unique in their own way.
What was that like, coming home and working at home again? Being so far away.
I really liked it. Just because, with me being Diné. So, little background story. Scientists really don't see Diné, the Diné people, as being like ancestors, or related to the ancestral Puebloans, or, the Anasazi. I mean, they call them just the ancestral Puebloans rather than Anasazi. But it's funny, because in our oral history and a lot of like the songs and the teachings, we are actually related to them. So being in this area and doing archaeology, I always kept that in my mind. So yeah, I had to be super respectful, because, I was raised traditional. I was raised to leave, archaeological sites alone, artifacts alone. And so in the teachings, their spirits are still within their home area, because for at least for Diné, we're a matrilineal society. So everything revolves around the woman. Their homes revolve around the woman. So, a lot of the archaeological sites were pit houses. So they're homes. And so that's the women's domain. You have to have reverence, you wouldn't like it if someone came to your house and started, moving things or digging up things. So, you really have to present yourself in a certain manner. And before I went to, the sites, I always made sure and I protected myself, just incorporating what I know as my identity and my tradition. I kind of meshed that into my work. And so that was very different in terms of coming out here and doing archaeology in my home setting. And, of course, I was like that with, the other sites I was working on in the plains or the Great Basin area. But here in my home, it's different, because that's where I'm rooted from. This is where I come from, and this is where my family comes from. So I knew that there was a stronger presence of the spirituality here on this land, because, we value our land and our earth and everything in this environmental setting Diné people, as Native people, and especially here because the work that I did was within our four sacred mountains. So I knew that was, a major thing for me to keep in mind is that reverence.
Well, and I wonder too, because, when I met you, when you were working on this project, not too far from your home, there was other Diné people working on the project as well. And I'm wondering if having, I don't know, almost like a community within the CRM firm, if that made it feel more like you could approach the archaeology in the way that you wanted to, or it made, the other people working with you feel more open to what you were doing or anything like that. I don't know exactly, but if that affected the experience as well.
Yes, for sure it did. I definitely felt more comfortable. I could be myself. And I say that because, like what we previously talked about in the first part of the podcast is, the difference in social dynamics. And it definitely is different between Native people and everyone else. So having, my indigenous coworkers there, it made me feel comfortable, but I also knew that I could kind of bounce around ideas with them and say, my thoughts. And we always had visitors there too. So either from the Navajo Nation, Acoma, or, Zuni.
Or random people like me.
And, that was great because they also had incorporations. I would talk with them. I would do my work, but I would also talk with them, to kind of let them know that, I'm interested in what you have to say.
Mm-hmm,
I have my own thoughts, but, it varies too. Like even within the indigenous communities, each family has their own way of doing things, their own way of having their song sung or, traditional aspects. It's all different. It's all different within our tribe. So it was nice to, hear perspectives from my tribe, but also, Acoma and Zuni.
Well, on that note, we are at our second break time. Alrighty. So again, we will be back here in a moment.
Stay cool and choose from over 40 in-stock ceiling fans for under $100, plus an 11% rebate at Menards. We carry the largest selection of in-stock Hunter ceiling fans, available in a variety of designs, finishes, and features. Create the perfect look and lighting for any room with a new Hunter ceiling fan. Visit Menards.com and view our entire selection of Hunter ceiling fans, plus the weekly flyer and other great deals going on now.
Save big money at Menards.
Is your vehicle stopping like it should? Does it squeal or grind when you brake? Don't miss out on summer brake deals at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
All right, we are back again. So let's keep talking a little bit about what your experience was like in CRM. You were talking about what it was like working with your Diné coworkers and on your homeland. Did you have any other experiences in CRM that felt like particularly relevant, I guess, or any stories from working on your homeland?
Yeah. So there was this really interesting time where we were actually working out near the Blanco Canyon area.
Mm-hmm.
And we were, excavating and working, and then we went into lunch. And during that time, there was actually a coyote that came up to the site area. And that was pretty interesting. And, from what I've learned, coyotes, they're not necessarily bad animals in terms of, Diné belief. they're more like animals who warn us. They kind of give us the heads up of, you know, something that may happen or whatever. So seeing the coyote, I immediately kind of like, you know, did my own little prayer, but also I gave it an offering because it was within the area and it wasn't really going away anytime soon.
Even with people there?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and there was like a whole group of us.
That's crazy.
Yeah, that's crazy. And so once I left work, the field, I called up my mom and my uncle, and they're both, you know, pretty traditional. They're really traditional people. You know, they know the ceremonial setting. And I told them about this, and they were saying, well, it's probably, you know, the spirit who came back to just like see what we were doing, what we were up to.
Like of the people that were there before? Basically?
Yeah, the site that we were digging, the home area that we were digging into, it was probably, you know, them coming back to see, you know, what we were messing around with, or, you know, what. And that was probably the most interesting thing, to have that archaeological and cultural setting for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine that. I mean, coming back after, you know, hundreds of years and being like, what are these people doing?
Yeah, but it was bizarre, you know, like there's a whole group of us and he was just, you know, hanging around.
Yeah, that's crazy. What did other people say? Did people have the same kind of reaction, or?
No. It's really funny, you know, like I gave an offering, you know, just like a piece of food or whatever. And one of my coworkers, you know, they were getting on me about, you know, you shouldn't feed the animals because then they become dependent. And so I was like, I understand, but like, you know, this is a cultural thing. And so I just explained it to her. But yeah, it's pretty crazy. Like everybody else thought that was pretty crazy.
Yeah. So you were working on a project, and it seemed like a pretty good mix of like, there was a good number of Diné people, and then a good number of obviously not Diné people. You know, Belagana, if we'll say. How do you think people's reaction, like the other archaeologists that you were working with, do you feel like they were open to learning about, you know, Diné culture and how that tied into archaeology? Do you feel like, I don't know, what was that experience like?
It was a little frustrating because, you know, I mean, they were definitely willing to listen if I was vocal about it, but it's not like they were thinking about that aspect of it. Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, you know, everyone's nice in their own way, but, you know,
right.
It's like two sides of me. So it's not like I ever lost my archaeological sense or my cultural sense. So it was always with me. And, you know, whenever I would say something about whatever, you know, whether it be cultural or archaeological, you know, not always that people like understand, or, you know, because they feel like, well, I studied this, I know what I'm doing, I know what I'm talking about. And that's fine for the most part, you know, but then again, it's the whole not incorporating the, you know, the indigenous cultural aspect of it into archaeology.
If this is touchy, then we can move on. You know, did you feel like there was a different response maybe with you and your coworkers that were Diné versus, you know, the Zuni or the Acoma people that came to visit?
Surprisingly, no.
No? Okay.
No, because it's like we're all different tribes, but when we shared stories and ideas, it kind of like always overlapped. And so that was like the really interesting thing about it is, you know, there was always some sort of connection between whatever we had to say.
No, but I mean like from your non-indigenous coworkers, like, you know, because like you were talking about, there's this whole, you know, Anasazi versus ancestral Pueblo, and like, do you feel like that there was, you know, like there's this tricky thing that you see in anthropology where like a lot of archaeologists will definitely not all of them.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of them that will only take oral history if it goes with what the science tells them. Like, oh, this oral history is legitimate and this oral history isn't, basically.
Kind of, yeah. Because, I mean, they're more interested in the facts and what they're actually seeing versus, the underlying, interpretation of it. Because there's one interesting thing that my uncle always talked to me about, because, I was a student learning about, the correspondence between Mesoamerica archaeology and, the Southwest area. And kind of like, the ball cords and the door shapes and stuff like that.
Right.
And I was talking to him and I was saying, Uncle, like, why do you think, they made their doors that way? And I genuinely wanted to know. And the first thing he said to me is like, honey, he's like, you're thinking too much like an anthropologist. The only reason why they made their doors that way is so they could fit their, their headdresses through for the ceremony. And that's one time where, I really was like, whoa, like, yeah, like I didn't realize that. And yeah, it kind of took me off guard because I always had to somehow balance the two, because what I was learning, it was getting pumped into me about, archaeology, anthropology, and kind of the study of, being away from that cultural aspect of me, moving away from the reservation. I kind of forgot, some things, but then once I moved home, I had to like bring it all back. Yeah, but I mean, like, I'm not very shy. Like, if people want to ask me questions, I'm like totally willing to like, let them know, stories or whatever, just kind of inform them. Like, I'm totally willing to do that. But, people want to be their own people, they want to know their own things. So,
well, what advice would you give others in CRM about how to better work with Indigenous colleagues, and then vice versa, I suppose, too?
Yeah, like I would probably say, like, just communicate, we're all human and no one's better than anyone else. But, just having that reverence, I think, for both sides, I think is really helpful.
What about where would you like to see CRM go? Like, how would you, if you saw it in the future, what would it look like in your, if it looked like what you wanted it to look like?
I would like CRM to, well, the good thing about the company that I worked for is they were super willing to kind of bridge that gap. Like, I'm not really sure if like most CRM companies would allow, Indigenous groups to come and visit whenever, they like.
Right. Yeah.
And definitely like, I think that's one thing that my company really worked hard at doing is, incorporating that and maintaining that connection between the archaeologists and Indigenous people. And so moving forward, I would say just, really taking into consideration the respect that we have for cultural resources and our land and our area, and kind of just as archaeologists realizing that and kind of presenting themselves in that same manner, and just like keeping in mind that, whenever you're holding something like an artifact or something, that was made either for practical use or ceremonial use. You find things and you don't really know where that line is drawn, but there's always that notion of, okay, well, this may be cultural in the ceremonial sense, or it may be cultural in the everyday use or whatever. And it's just like, you never really know. So having that reverence, that's kind of an important thing to me. And I would say, for a lot of indigenous archaeologists.
So, okay, if you could offer 3 pieces of advice, and this could be either to people who are looking to work with tribes or descendant communities, or, upcoming indigenous archaeologists, or I don't know, the general public in anthropology, what 3 pieces of advice would you give?
I would say don't assume too much going in, because, no matter where you go and no matter who you talk to, you're always going to learn more. And that's going to broaden your perspective as an individual. And if you're broadened as an individual, you're going to go and share that knowledge, and it's going to, fold. So that's, it grows in that way. And I would say just knowing that we all have our differences, and knowing that not all our differences are bad things. For me, I was brought up in a home, and my grandparents, they didn't know English. My mom and my older sisters, their first language was Navajo. So I was always kind of brought up, with the Navajo language and the accent and stuff like that. So pronouncing, scientific words and stuff like that, sometimes I would get tongue-tied because a little of that would come out. And so I would say, like, that was probably one thing that kind of really dawned on me, because, people would correct me when I would talk about, a lot of scientific things. And, like, it's not like, I didn't know what I was talking about. It was just that, my accent would come out, or, my thought process on my language would come, in a different way.
Right.
And so, kind of keeping that in mind, dealing with indigenous people, and then also, thinking about how we are as humans, and kind of like speaking to one another in, a respectable manner. Like, I'm all about respect, and I think that was embedded in me from, a really young age from, my family members, both my father and my mother, and their families. Because, respect is such an important thing. You don't know what someone's going through, or you don't know what they've experienced. And we're all products of our own environment, but yet we can also, establish a good foundation to go forward,
Okay. This might seem like a little bit of an odd switch after, like you're saying these really profound things. But I'm just personally really curious.
Okay.
So what inspired you to switch from anthropology to GIS for your master's? I'm curious if there's like, if it was more like practical, like, oh, there's, more GIS jobs or something like that, or if it was more like something about, mapping and the attachment to place and things like that really drew you to it.
Okay, yeah. So it's really interesting, actually, because you think about archaeological sites and the best locations for them. Everything's so spatial, and I think that's a really good way, and I'm sure other people know this, but it's an amazing way to go forth and produce data, especially for archaeology. There's 2 things that I really love. It's LiDAR and photogrammetry. And I feel like a lot of archaeological companies, and even in the scholarly sector of archaeology, they're starting to incorporate that a lot more. Because with LiDAR, you can actually see, things that are hidden to the human eye. For instance, my company, we actually wanted to use LiDAR to kind of get a good sense of where the Chacoan roads are. Yeah.
Mhm.
And there's so many of them. And where we were working, you could actually see one of them. And so that kind of like gave us the idea of like, hey, let's do LiDAR and kind of see how extensive this area is. Because I mean, Chaco's a ways away. You know, this area is still within the Chaco and settlement. So we were really curious to see how far the roads extended to. And
Mhm.
for photogrammetry, you know, you can get like the whole 3D image of, say, like a pit house or, you know, rock art. And it gives you a totally different experience when you're looking at these photographs. And my company actually utilized that a lot this past project that we were working on. And, you know, just like kind of that like really drew me into GIS because I've always liked it and I've always used it, you know, making maps and kind of utilizing the technology in that manner. But, you know, I just knew that if I did GIS, that it would give me a stronger sense of like location, archaeological location, but also like the technology. Because our technology and our methods in producing archaeological data, not producing archaeological data, but, you know, our methods, our methodology, and incorporating all that technology into it gives you a stronger sense of methodology and actually what we're finding. Because when you're doing CRM, it's all this data collection and, you know, then everything gets taken out if it's in that path of, you know, excavation, the mass excavation. So having those intensive documentations, I think that really helps us in terms of like archiving and using them in museums. So just that technology, it just, I don't know, it just excited me and thinking about using it in archaeology. And I don't know, I just really wanted to kind of utilize that. One of my coworkers, his name is Ben Hammer. He actually, you know, introduced me into the Mass GIS program at ASU, and I really like it. And in a lot of our discussions in class, I always, you know, talk about archaeology and GIS. So it really goes hand in hand. And the great thing about archaeology is you can always utilize some sort of science.
Well, man, I should have asked you that earlier because there's plenty more that we could talk about there. And for anyone that's interested in these types of technology issues, we just had a podcast episode on technology. Let me just see real quick what number that was. And we specifically talked about LiDAR as one of those. So it was episode 25. So if you're interested in hearing more about this topic, go check that one out as well. But in the meantime, we have to cut this one off, sadly. But thank you so much again, Rebecca, for coming on the show. And
yeah, of course.
Yeah, we appreciate having you.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks, guys. All right. Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening to the Heritage Voices podcast. You can find show notes at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/heritage voices. Please subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, or the Google Play Music Store. Also, if you like the show, please share it with your friends or write us a review. If you have any questions, comments, or show suggestions, please reach out to me at jessica@livingheritageanthropology.org, or you can find me on Facebook through Living Heritage Anthropology or on Twitter @LivingHeritageA. As always, thank you to my co-hosts Lyle Belenqua and Jason Nez for their collaboration on our incredible logo.
This show is produced by the Archaeology Podcast Network, Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in Reno, Nevada at the Reno Collective.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.
Save on O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner. Get 2 cans of O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner for just $8. Valid in-store only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.